Hello, friends. Firstly, I would like to thank Women and Young Members Excellence Committee of the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India for giving me with the opportunity for being the coordinator for today's webinar. I, on behalf of Women and Young Excellence Committee of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, welcome you all in the Youth Excellence Symposium number 19. Youth Excellence Symposium is a Friday series of program conducted by the Committee for the Women and Young Members. It is one of the Women and Young Members Excellence Committee initiatives to not only disseminate information to members on technical updation, but also to empower and to inspire them to come at forefront and realize their verbal skills at public forum. I would like to introduce our today's guest speaker, CA Vedant Gada. Vedant is an associate member of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India and has secured a rank in CA final examination. He has cleared CFA level 2 with 90 percentile and CFA level 3 candidate. He has also completed a management development program from IIM Lucknow and has secured an admit to Young Leaders program of the prestigious Indian School of Business. Vedant's professional experience. Over the last few years, Vedant has involved in areas like corporate insolvency resolution, forensic audits, turnaround strategy, due diligence, business operations, and business development. He has also played an integral role in the international acquisition in UAE. Currently, he is working in the founder's office of Bharat NXT. Vedant's positions of responsibilities and other achievements. He is a member of Board of Studies, Accountancy of the Nasim Monji College of Commerce and Economics, Autonomous, Mumbai. He also served as a core committee member of the Human Resource Development Committee of the Bombay Chartered Accounting Society and the Young Industry Members Empowerment Committee of the CVO Chartered and Cost Account Association. Vedant holds the rare distinction of being awarded the Best Student in both junior and degree college by Nasim Monji College of Commerce and Economics, Autonomous, Mumbai. He has won over 70 competitions like case studies, debates, business strategy, policy making, quiz at national, state, and intercollegial levels, and has represented the University of Mumbai in quizzing at national level. I would now invite our young and dynamic guest speaker for today's webinar. Over to you, Vedant.
Thank you, CA Ankit, for the lovely introduction. I would also take this opportunity to thank the Women and Young Members Excellence Committee of ICAI for organizing this symposium and giving young chartered accountants like me an opportunity to share my experience. So we'll get on with the topic for today, that is opportunities for CAs in startups. So what I've done today is I have divided my talk into two segments. The first segment would largely talk about what startups are. How did I stumble across startups? What are the things that need to be considered before joining a startup? And I have introduced an element of a Q&A after after these three questions to solve any questions if people have in the above three topics, and also to get any suggestions from the audience with respect to what they would want me to cover in addition to what the other things that I have planned. The second segment would largely talk about the opportunities that are available to CAs. This would include both as employees or people contracted with startups, and second is for all the CAs in practice. Then we would talk about what needs to be considered while negotiating a job in startups, because I have seen a few people fall prey to wrong practices, and I felt this was something that needs to be talked about. We follow that up with what kind of exit opportunities are available after you've joined a startup, and then I open up the floor for the second round of question and answers. So to start with, what exactly are startups? We've all heard the hula hoo around startups. We all have heard the name startups in our daily lives. But what exactly is a startup? In simple words, a startup is a young company which has brought to market a unique product or service, and its aim is to make it irresistible to the for the customers, so that there is mass adoption of the product or service that they are offering. So the question in most people's minds is, how does it differ from the existing businesses that are there? On a high level, a startup and an existing business are the same. However, there is a slight difference in the methods that are applied. While a startup would apply methods that have not been tried before, they would try to innovate or disrupt the sectors in which they are working in. A traditional business would adopt the age-old tried methods which have been profitable for long. So while startups would try something new that exposes them to a risk of either massive success or failures, traditional business would go about with traditional methods which have been time tested and which have always returned profits in some form or the other. The other thing that is synonymous with a startup is scale, uh, growth, and speed. So generally with startups, the focus is on gaining a greater amount of scalability in a short period of time, and this is often done at expensive cash burns, and this is generally funded by venture capital money. Now let us understand how startups are able to scale so fast. So for that, we would need to understand the industrial revolutions that have taken place from the 16th, 17th century up till now. So all the three industrial revolutions that took place up till now, they had one specific lever which helped them to amplify their impact. So the specific levers at that point of time were labor, money, capital, and knowledge. And now in this era, after the late 20th century, uh, what we've seen is we have a new leverage that is in the terms of technology. And technology is a leverage or a lever which is much more powerful than all the three earlier levers, because it is able to put us all into places that we never imagined. Today, while I am sitting here in Mumbai, I'm able to communicate and give this talk to participants who might be, let's say, in Jharkhand, which would not have been earlier possible. We're able to communicate, do business with countries across the globe, and technology has played a large part to it. And it is this technology that is being used as a lever by the startups to expand their business. Now, let us understand how these startups are funded and how do they go about doing their business. So, startup funding usually happens in stages. When the startup is first found, it's initially bootstrapped by the founders and their friends and family. Once they have some sort of an idea in mind and they have a basic blueprint in mind, they usually raise funds from angel investors. Angel investors refers to high net worth individuals or people who have earlier been founders who would want to experiment with certain new ideas. So when angel investors invest, that usually happens in a seed round of funding. At a seed round, generally the startup's product is not tried and tested in the market. There is no clarity whether there would be a success or a failure of the product. Once the seed round funding is done and once the market has been, the product goes live into the market, we move to a series A and onwards funding. So based on the performance of the startup and the product that they have, along with the conviction on what is the market cycle, what is the market trend, what is the demand for the product, we have different rounds like series A, series B, series C and onwards that take place. And these are usually funded by venture capitals. So now that we've understood what startups are and how they're funded and everything in a brief, I would move on to certain stats about the startup ecosystem in India. So the startup ecosystem in India is the third largest in the world after the USA and China. We have a we have around 108 unicorns in India. A unicorn is a company with a market capitalization of over $1 billion. To put it into context, at today's USD rate, it would be between 8,200 to 8,300 crore rupees. So the number of registered startups in India are 99,000. So now the registration here refers to the definition as per the DPIIT, and those kind of startups are around a lakh in India right now, and out of which around 5% are funded. The funding status here refers to funding by angel investors or venture capitals, while all the others are largely self-funded by the founders themselves or through their friends and family. The valuation of India's unicorn startups as of today is a whopping $345 billion. Now, this was up till the end of 2022, the number here was much higher at around $570 billion. But with the funding winter that has come in, there have been a lot of slashes in the valuations, and the number has come down to $345 billion. So clearly, the Indian market provides a large base for the whole world to invest in, and all the engineering and science graduates in the world, approximately 25% of them come from India. And along with our base of around 1.4 billion population, India serves as a huge market for any kind of business. So, along with that, so what we have seen over the years is there are a lot of unicorns as well, which are unicorns in the waiting. We have around 103 of them right now in India. And all of this way back in 2011, if someone would have asked how many unicorns does India have, the answer would have been 0. Way back in 2011, we got our first unicorn, which was InMobi. And within 12 years, that is from 2011 to 2023, we now have around 108 unicorns and some 103 unicorns and around a lakh startups. Coming to why did we see such a huge boost in the number of startups in India? Why did we see such a huge boost in the innovation that is taking place in India? I think the government would deserve a lot of credit for this. It would be because of the kind of tech infrastructure that the government has enabled. The Startup India scheme did promote all of this, but the scale and the mass disruption that we are seeing, most of it has to be attributable to the India Stack that got built by the government. So India Stack is a set of open source resources that are available, which can be used by startups to help in their businesses. So the India Stack consists of things like our Aadhaar, which stores the biometric information and the social security kind of information for all Indians. Then we have the Jan Dhan movement, wherein almost all Indians got a bank account. And then we had the mobile revolution that took place because of the advent of Jio in 2016, because of which today the data costs in India are nearly the lowest in the world. So all of this has spurred this mass movement in startups in India. And I think we can proudly say that India is the only country in the world where companies are not becoming startups by solving tech infrastructure problems. The tech infrastructure largely has been given by the government and the initiatives of the government. So the some of the greatest initiatives of the government in terms of the NPCI, which hosts our UPI. It's the Unified Payment Interface. And now we have something called as OCEN, which is the Open Credit Enablement Network, which would soon be a bigger innovation. So OCEN is a network that would connect people in the fintech sectors, and all the transactions that we are doing on UPI right now, all of that would be used to help create records about the serviceability of loans for a person. So right now, what happens is a lot of people are not able to get loans because there is no history around them. With OCEN, there would be clear statistics available on the person, and it would enable a lot of credit to grow in the market, which would spur the next revolution in the business journey of India. We also have the ONDC that is coming up. It is an open network for e-commerce, and which aims to get all the small kiranas and all the other small MSMEs onto the e-commerce network to reap the maximum benefits. Currently, the benefits of e-commerce are being reaped by only a few, around 15 to 16,000 sellers, while the number of MSMEs in India, the retail-based MSMEs, is estimated to be around 1 crore. So you can look at the mass opportunity that is available and what the government is doing. So the creation of all of this network would allow a lot of business players to come in, and we would soon see a lot more startups coming into these places. So broadly speaking, these are the sectors under which we see startups. So some of the sectors are e-commerce, fintech, enterprise tech, consumer services, media and entertainment, ed tech, logistics, health tech, travel tech, others. And these others would include something like a clean tech. So e-commerce, I think the whole of the audience would be well aware of how we've seen startups in e-commerce making a revolution. It started with Flipkart in India, and we also have the likes of Meesho here and Udaan. Fintech is quite broad. It refers to all the startups with services in the BFI sector who are using technology to enable or maximize their services. So it has different subtypes under it. The subtypes include paytech, which relates to payments technology. Then we have insurtech, which represents insurance with technology. Then we have wealthtech, which works with wealth management and technology. So the examples here are endless. The best example that I can think of is Zerodha, which democratized stock trading and is one of the highest profitable startups of the country. And the startup where I work at, BharatNext, also happens to be a fintech, which is a paytech. Enterprise tech are companies which are using technology to deliver cloud-based solutions to big enterprises. So the example here could be a browser stack. Browser stack is one of the fastest startups in India to hit profitability. Consumer services, I think all of us are aware. We usually use Zomato or Swiggy at least once a month to order our food. And we yesterday had a watershed moment in consumer services startup history with Zomato turning a 2 crore rupee profit. Media and entertainment has a lot of firms, and some of them include Dream11, the new startup by Ashneer Grover called CrickPay. We have ShareChat here. Now, EdTech is something which was very well celebrated up till a year back, but of late in the last year, there have been a lot of controversies related to EdTech startups like Byju's. And we have a lot of other startups. So this is just a brief about the startups, and I can get into the specifics if someone has any specific queries regarding startups. So now we talk about how did I stumble across startups. So to understand this, we would have to tread back to my industrial training days. Uh, don't worry, it's not that long back. I just cleared last year. So my industrial training was just a 2 years back. And so during my industrial training, I had joined a company called Sajal Glass. So Sajal Glass was a company which had freshly come out of the corporate insolvency resolution process of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So at this time, a new set of shareholders had brought this company and they wanted to revive this company. So traditionally, the company was not doing well, and this was a time of change when I entered. And during this time, well, at that time, I had hoped my role would be largely associated with finance, but since it was a time of change and there were ample opportunities, I also got to get involved in operations along with finance. And there was a lot of ambiguity at that point of time. And working there, I understood that I like roles where you get to strategize as well as execute and do both things together. Now, once I cleared last year, I was on a lookout for an opportunity where I could get to do both these things, which is strategize and execute both as well. And while Sejal would have allowed me to do that, it was into manufacturing. And I wanted to try a new age idea, like something related to tech, because I felt tech is a big enabler which should be used and which would have exponential growth. So after qualification, I think everyone can relate, whoever is in the industry, we have various opportunities. And I also got all those opportunities like investment banking, leadership programs in big corporates, or FP&A roles and credit roles in banks and the like. So the closest thing that came to what I like was management consulting. But the the only differentiating factor between a startup and management consulting for me was that a startup would allow me to be a part of a 0 to 1 journey, which is starting something from the ground up with all its challenges. And the second thing was it would allow me an opportunity to both strategize and execute. A management consulting would have allowed me only to strategize, and that was one of the prime reasons that I came across the startup world. Now, why I left investment banking and the top leadership programs was they were because I did not want to limit myself to a particular zone at the moment, and I wanted to venture into entrepreneurship eventually. So now let us come to what are the facts that one needs to consider before joining a startup. Now, joining a startup can be just like any other job, it can be a significant decision because it has the potential to alter your career a lot. And there are various intrinsic as well as extrinsic factors which would determine whether you should consider joining a startup, and if yes, whether you should consider joining that particular startup. So the intrinsic factors related to this would be, the biggest factor is your personality type. What kind of a personality are you? Do you like something that is structured, or do you like something that that is chaotic, but you would like to bring structure to it? So what happens is, even I had faced this during while studying for CA final, and also during the articleship, is we as CAs are accustomed to some kind of structure because all of our learning has happened in some kind of structure. And a startup would be a place where there is a lot of ambiguity and there is no fixed path. So if you feel as a personality you would not be able to take a pressure of ambiguity, then you would need to take it into consideration before joining a startup. The second is, a startup would offer a lot of unknown challenges and you would have to build something from the ground up. So there are In startups as well, there are two kinds. One would be pre-maturity startups, startups who are looking at a product market fit. Their product is developed, but they don't know what is the correct audience for that product. And there are mature startups who have found a good product market mix, but they are looking at good economics. So for the first kind of startups, which are places where you would essentially going from 0 to 1, you would have to take a lot of ownership of the work, and you have to be okay with that while doing it. Now we should look at the extrinsic factors, or the factors that are related to startups, which you need to consider before joining a particular startup. So the most important thing while doing that is you look at the people of the startup. The people here would refer to both the founders and the team. Now, while looking at the founders, it is very important to evaluate what kind of background do the founders have, what kind of pedigree do they bring to the table, what do are they really passionate about the startup or not? Because there have been instances of many founders who, while their startup were making losses, have spent lavishly on foreign trips and everything, and they were not really that passionate about the product. So why joining a startup? So this is something that is my advice. There is no right and wrong over here, but while looking at this, you always look at the passion that the founder has and the fire in the belly that they have. If the founder is passionate about it, they will go to the maximum extent possible to make things work. The second thing that you need to look at is the team that is there in the founder, in the startup. Because joining an early stage startup, you would be largely working with around 6 to 8 people, and it is very important that you are comfortable with what kind of a team is there. So you need to make sure that the team is also well assembled. There are people from different backgrounds with different perspectives. If you feel that a lot of people have similar kind of backgrounds, it it could be a bit difficult for the startup as well, and for you as well, because your learning could be a bit limited, because you would not be getting a lot of different perspectives there. The next thing, once you have seen the founders, is the conviction in the business model. So you yourself need to be very convinced in the business model of the startup. You need to ask questions like, does there really exist a market for such a product or not? If it exists, why was this never tried earlier? Why was it tried today? If you had to put your own money, would you bet your money on this startup or not? Then you need to ask other questions related to the business model, as in, is there any threat of existing players moving in? Is there any defensibility to the product of the startup or not? The next thing that we move on to is the funding that the startup has received. Now, one thing that I would advise everyone is to look at the kind of runway that the startup has. Runway refers to the number of months that the startup can function at the current cash burn. Now, if the runway of the startup is less than 6 months and the startup is not looking for a funding or is not able to secure a funding, my advice to you would be to avoid venturing into such a startup, because a wrong decision here could derail your career by minimum 6 months, and the maximum can be a lot. Because once you get into a failed startup, it also has a lot of ramifications on you as well. So always try to ensure to see that you enter a startup with a good runway that is available. And so this is very contextual. This is mainly for early stage startups, but if you have seen a startup has shown a good product market fit, there is good traction and there are good revenues for the product, you can try with around 9-10 months of runway, a startup with around 9-10 months of runway as well. And we as CAs, we know how we can read balance sheets and how we can read the P&Ls. And most of the sales turnover data, the financials have to be filed publicly. So we can always go to the MCA and extract the records of the startup to find out the details that would help us here. We also have websites like Crunchbase, Traction, which would give us a lot of insight into these details. So that would be a must before joining a startup. The last aspect is um, if you want to learn a specific set of soft skills and and you feel you would be able to take the pressure, you can join a startup. Now here what I refer to is usually what happens is during entry level jobs in startups, uh, there is no clarity on your job role, so you might also be required to venture out and do something in addition to what your job role is, and it would also require you to interact with other companies and the vendors, where you might be talking with people who are far more experienced than you, or maybe who are 10 to 15 years more senior to you. So here you would also have to factor in how to talk to them. Um, Doing all of this and while working in such a small team, in such a high pressure environment, you yourself would develop a lot of soft skills like leadership abilities, conflict management, people management, etc. So yes, so broadly, these are the points that one should consider before joining a startup. Now, this is the end of the first segment of my talk, and I would like to open up the session for any questions that people might have at this point of time.
Yeah, so I'm checking if there are any questions. So, Vedant, good, that I just wanted to understand that when uh, while startups are very attractive, and there are still quite only a handful amount of startups, who become unicorns or decacons or now whatever expression.
Yes.
Only a couple of ones, or wherein all these things that you mentioned
Yeah.
and very beautifully articulated. So how do we understand? I mean, whether they are going to be a decacon or unicorn, or it's just pure luck. I mean, when you are joining these kind of journeys, startup journey, because startup is a journey at the end of the day, right?
Definitely.
And you are, as a young person or as a young professional, you are betting your maybe a, I don't know, career, but yeah, maybe a career as well on that particular person and that particular person's vision. So how do you understand, and I mean, I don't know how much we will be able to understand during even before meetings, that how much of it is there or not there. So how do you go about it? Or maybe if you, once you join, so how much time do you give to that startup, and how do you, if you want to exit, so can there be a possibility, or how? I know it's a big long question, but yeah.
So understood. So I think I'll take the example of the startup that I have joined to better answer this question, because while we see there are around a lakh startups in India, only 5% of them have received funding, and also that globally around 90% of startups fail. So yes, it's very important about what startup are you choosing and to make the right choice. Ultimately, while making the decision, you would consider all of these factors and you would try to make the right decision. But sometimes regulations don't help you, or there can be changes in the marketplace which could affect the working of the startup. So I can give the example of a startup called Slice earlier, which got massively impacted by the changes by RBI in the prepaid instrument guidelines. So yeah, so to answer that, let's come to Bharat Next. And why did I join Bharat Next? What made me think, did it have a $1 billion potential or not? Or did it had some kind of potential or not? So first we'll try and understand what Bharat Next does. Bharat Next is a payments application that is mainly centered towards SMEs to help solve their working capital problems. What we do is we allow SMEs to use their existing credit card as a working capital facility to pay their vendors or their salaries or GST for that matter. So traditionally, in the business context, credit cards as a tool could not be used. They could only be used for travel because you require a POS machine or you require a payment gateway. But when you happen to be in a B2B context, there is always the argument of who will bear the MDR, because the person who is giving you the POS is bearing the MDR.
Correct.
So in the B2B context, you could never use a credit card to pay your vendors. You could never
basically the commission, right? That the
Yes.
fintech or whoever charges.
Yes. So when we make a payment using a credit card, the merchant who is receiving that payment, he is charged a fee called the merchant discount rate, which ranges from between 1.1% to can go as high as 3%, depending on the network that is being used, the type of business that they are in, and the vintage of the business. And there are various factors related to that. So because of that, in the B2B context, credit card could never be used. You could never use your credit card for payment of GST. You could use them for a business purpose only for travel and for rentals. So when I came across Bharat Next, I found them to be doing something unique, wherein they provided these businesses with a solution where they could use the existing credit cards as a working capital facility. So now, using the Bharat Next application, you can pay your supplier in their bank account using your credit card. So what that does is, let's say I have to pay 1,000 rupees to you, Chintan.
Yeah.
And I do not have that money today. And I could use my credit card. You get the 1,000 rupees tomorrow, and I have to pay the credit card company after 45 days. So that is around 45 to 50 days of free credit for me, which helps me in expanding my business. So that was the business model of Bharat Next. So I had an initial discussion with the founders. I understood the business model. Then I went
BNPL kind of a model, but for working capital space.
Yes. So I would explain how BNPL would differ here from Bharat Next. Is in a BNPL, the firm providing the BNPL would bear the credit risk. In the Bharat Next context, we are only enabling the payment. If I have used the application to pay you, you would receive the money tomorrow. I have to pay my credit card issuing bank after 45 days. Bharat Next enabled the payment. So there is, so the credit minimized. So looking at this,
it's a very niche kind of a thing, which if done right can have a massive impact.
Yes, if done right, it could have a massive impact. So when I looked at it, I did find that this kind of an idea will have a lot of traction in the market. But I was not sure about the numbers. I requested the founder for a few days to decide whether I would join or not. And in the few days that I decided, I spoke to a lot of people to gather their insights about would they use such a product or not. Second thing is, I looked at the statistics that were available. So overall in India, the credit card limits that are assigned are somewhere around $970 billion, which is massive. But if we look at the credit card usage data, the limits that are utilized are somewhere around $160 billion. So you see, there is a huge gap there, which only the existing credit cards can fulfill. And even in the 160 to 170 odd billion dollars that are being spent, only around $55 billion is being spent for business spends. So I see that there was a good a great opportunity for it to expand. After that, I looked at the MSME lending data to understand what kind of a credit gap exists in the market. So based on various reports, various studies, what I could find is the credit gap in India is as large as $530 billion, which is unaddressed.
Okay.
So that gave me conviction in the business model. And that gave me a sort of conviction that this is something that can grow up. Now, coming to the question of whether that is going to be a right decision or not, we soon find out in the next 2 or 3
Ultimately, it is pure luck. Most likely, of course, I
Yeah.
mean, the fortune always was the brave, but
Yes.
you can never
So
predict
what you
all
can
these
do-
things.
Yes, what you can do is you can make sure whatever you can make sure on your side, but
Whatever, control the controllables. Simple.
yes, yes. So,
Okay. There were a few questions, but I think one was relating to tenders. I don't know if something relating to tender in by public sector undertaking is a. Okay, so one question is given here. I don't know if it is relevant. So while public sector undertakings go tenders, and one of the critical aspect of the tenders are the past turnover criteria, experience, and etc. for bigger projects. So how can startups do as a startup, if registered as a startup, if I know or correct me if I'm wrong, who are considered as a startup only if the DPIIT
Yeah,
has
gives you
given
the-
you a certificate that you are a startup.
yes,
Other than that, you cannot consider yourself a startup.
yes,
Whatever business one is going through, of course, it can be termed as a startup as a layman terms, but it cannot be stated as a startup if DPIIT registration is not been obtained.
understood. Yes,
Correct now?
yes.
So I think what they want to understand is, can startups have some kind of an advantage, or is there any scheme that you are aware about where startups, if at all they are registered?
Yes.
Uh,
So I did not deliberately touch upon Startup India scheme and the benefits that are available to startups because that would have deviated from the opportunities that were available. But since we've gotten this question, currently in India, there are over 5,000 schemes that are positioned towards startups specifically. And um, there are businesses who function just on the basis of scheme discovery for MSMEs and startups. Coming to the question related to public sector undertaking tenders, there are relaxations for startups over there, just like there are relaxations for MSMEs. And coming to the question where if a startup is not registered under DPIIT, will they get the benefits? They could get the benefits if they are registered under MSMEs as an MSME and they meet certain criteria.
so
But
what I understand is all these PSUs are also given certain targets that
20%.
spend as 20% of whatever spend has to be coming in these. So certain full tenders are floated only for MSMEs. The bigger, the non-MSME people cannot, in fact, apply for tendering, and they will be disqualified in the technical round only.
Yes.
Okay. I think the other question is relating to opportunities. I think you will cover it in your next slide.
Yes. Yes.
I think we can go ahead in the second phase of your presentation.
Okay. Yeah. Super. So now we'll move on to uh, opportunities that are available for CAs in startups. So I have broken this down into two. One would be inside startups. What kind of roles can you get? And the second part would be as a service professional, what kind of services can you provide to as a CA to startups? To inside startups, we have various roles. While I'll be speaking on 5 roles specifically, and the sixth role is the traditional role. So one thing that we need to understand is a startup in the on high levels is just similar to a regular business. So it does have opportunities of all the traditional roles that are available to us in the industry, but some of them are redefined. So by redefinition, I mean that those roles might be amplified with some other department, or there might be extensive usage of technology over here, which might not be the case with all the companies in the industry. But even in the existing businesses, we are soon seeing a traction of technology picking up. So coming to the 5 specific roles, the first role that I'd speak about is the founder's office. And this is the role that I currently hold in Bharat Next. So to explain the founder's office role, founder's office role is very fluid. There is no fixed template to the founder's office role. So a founder's office role among startups could differ a lot into whatever is available to the person. And on top of that, it could also differ between within the same startup. So so in our Bharat Next, we have three founders office associates, and all three of us have different roles. So it depends largely on the needs of the business and of the founders. But to put a broad structure to it, this role would involve things like research and analysis. Um, so we'd be required to research a lot. This research would be about the data that we currently have, that we've generated on our customers. It could also be on the competitors. It could also be on what kind of different products are there in the market which we could collaborate with, and help improve the offering of our startup. The second thing is the founder's office serves as a liaison between the founder and all the departments in the organization. So as a founder's office, you are, are the linchpin or someone who is holding things together. You're basically the conductor of the orchestra, and you have to make sure that everything that has been planned is working smoothly within the startup. And if there are any hitches or if there are any problems, you try and identify them and you smoothen those out. Then this role also involves creation of processes. Now the creation of processes here would be, what happens is, since the startup is being built from the ground up, there are no processes at all, and everything is very ambiguous, and there is no clarity towards it. So as a founder's office, you would be required to create a lot of processes, and the creation of processes would have to be done from the perspective of institutionalizing the process. So an example here could be, let's say, right now you're working in a 0 to 1 startup. Obviously the vision of the founder would be to create an institution. Let's say Zomato, for that matter, way back in 2010 or 9 when they started, they might have created certain processes, and today it has grown into such a behemoth. So while in the founder's office, you would have to think from that perspective, that 5 years or 10 years down the line, when the business is becoming big, would this process still hold or not? So you have to institutionalize those processes. And in easier terms, what I can say is, founder's office is a largely strategic role with a strong bias for execution. And by execution here, I mean not just getting things done, but getting things done effectively and efficiently. Here, I would relate to, I would give an example of one of the tasks that I was given early on when I joined Bharat Next. And this relates to the cashbacks that we were giving on transactions. So when the app was formed in the previous year, there was no data for us to rely on to decide on what should be the cashback given, what is the correct amount that would motivate someone to do a transaction, how many transactions should receive a cashback, if you refer someone, do you require a cashback or not? And there were a lot of questions in mind. But looking at all of that, something, a program was conceptualized and put in place a year back. My task at this point was to determine whether that program which was put in place, looking at the data that we've gathered over the year, is it something that still holds true? Does it require to be optimized? And if it requires to be optimized, how do we optimize this? Now to do this, I was required to go through volumes and volumes of data as large as a GB, uh, and of transactions. I had to find out what kind of patterns were available in people using cashback. Is there a correlation between a person using higher amounts of cashback and doing higher amounts of transaction? Is there a correlation between the gender and the cashback usage? A correlation between the area that a person is coming from and the cashback that is being used? Or are there people who have cashbacks but they are not using cashbacks? Is there a difference between the registration type that a person has and the cashback that he has used? So there are various granularities that you need to get into. And this is something that the founder's office offers. And so when I got into the problem, it was like an ocean for me, where I was a small fish, where I had to find my way. So if you like such kind of things, you have an analytical bent of mind, you want to find things, you don't want a lot of structure, you want to create that structure, this is a very good place for you to be in. And coming to the optimization part, optimization generally would refer to two things. One is whether for the current spend, can the revenue be maximized? Or second, for the current revenue, can the spend be minimized? So that's about it in founder's office. Next role that I'll talk about is the role of growth associates and growth managers. So a growth role is something that is very much concerned with growing the revenues of the business. Now, this role gets more granular as the startup grows. Initially, when the startup is in a very small stage, the business is not looked at from different channels. It is looked at from a single lens. But as it keeps growing, you keep segmenting the businesses, and that is where the role of the growth managers increases. And you have people looking at different channels and working on specific things to increase the growth in that specific channel. So now, a growth manager or a growth associate is someone who would work with product managers in the company and who would also work with marketing to ensure that the revenues of the company are growing. And after a point in time, once the product market fit is available, is achieved, they would also have a look on the P&L as to the P&L of that specific channel is increasing or not. I will give everyone an example on the growth role. Let's take something which most people might be familiar with. Let's say we take up a brand like Nykaa. Now, Nykaa is a big business into cosmetics, and now they ventured into male cosmetics as well. Now, let's break it up into female cosmetics and male cosmetics. Female cosmetics would again be broken up into channels, which would be offline and online. In online, it would be further broken up into sales from own website, sales from Amazon, sales from Flipkart, sales from XYZ e-commerce website, etc., etc. So then a growth manager or growth associate will be assigned to each of these channels. So let's say if the revenue of Nika from Amazon is stagnating, so there would be one person responsible to find out why is it stagnating. Um, what can we do? Have we changed anything? Do we need to change the messaging? He will have to do a lot of A/B testing. He will have to look at the market trend, what is happening. So this role will, this role is very much suited for CAs because we are exposed to a lot of our strategic financial management. Our costing comes into place. While audit, you would have, while studying audit or while doing audit, people have gone through different business models. So you understand all of that. You can put all of your knowledge in one place to dig deep and help to grow the business. And that is what the growth role would look like. The next role would be a product management role. Now, a product management role for CAs would generally be limited to fintech companies. Product management opportunities in other types of startups might be a bit limited because at some places it does require a tech background as well. But from a fintech perspective, a product manager is some person who looks after what product needs to be offered. So they work on product strategy and development. So example, Bharat Next application, when we launched earlier, you could use the app for making payments to businesses, only to your vendors. Now there will be one product manager who would think what other things can we add to the app to improve the usage of the app, to increase the convenience for the customers. So one feature that we added was GST payments. So you could use the app for your GST payments, and from within the app, you can invite your CA to create the challan. They create the challan and you just swipe your card on the app and the payment is made. So there was that integration that was done. So a product manager would be someone who would be doing all of this. So they would first create a strategy around this product. Let's say we want to integrate GST into the app. Then they would find out whether there really is a demand for this product in the market or not. This they would do by talking to customers, looking at the trends that are available. Then they could look at the competition. What is the competition doing? They also need to look at things like risk management. Would opening up a GST payment from our platform open us to risks? Would we be complying with the law if we do this? What should be the pricing of this product if at all we launch it? Now, when we launch it, how should we launch it? How do we go to the market with this thing? All of this would come under product management. Now, what happens generally is when we speak to customers, a customer really does not know what they want, and you give them options. They would say yes to all the 10 features that you want. But in a startup with limited resources, it's very important to determine what is the most important thing that needs to be prioritized. So that would also be something that would be taken care of by a product manager or a product associate. They would have to determine which feature would be more required for the business, whether it is a must-have product, whether it is a good-have product. They need to determine that, and then they need to make the changes. So for CAs, this would largely be beneficial from a fintech perspective because we understand financial products and we can understand the financial needs of the market, and then we can work back with the technical teams and explain our requirements to them. But in other kind of startups, it could be a bit difficult for us, And that is why the opportunities there are limited, but there still are opportunities there. The next thing is program management. So program management kind of roles are available in operations heavy startups. A program management is something similar to a product management. A product management role or a product role largely deals with a product, while a program management role refers to a whole program. So a program might include products, or it could include operations heavy things, something related to the operation. So I would give you the example of Mesa School of Business here. So Mesa School of Business is a new startup, which is a VC backed business school. So what they've done is they have reimagined how business schools work, and they've started operations this year. So what they are doing is they will have a small cohort of around 60 students, and those 60 students um, would come and before they start, they would have one-on-one sessions with industry mentors, and each of them would be assigned a mentor who would understand their needs, requirements, and the whole 1 year course that they would take would then be based on what their industry needs and requirements are. And this course is specifically targeted towards startup leadership. So based on their requirements, these people are then explained and given training on whatever is required. So now that I've explained what Mesa does, is a program manager here would be someone who is handling the end-to-end operation, or who is responsible for the end-to-end operation of getting a student on board. There will be different functions which would generate the lead. So once the lead is, so what I am giving is an hypothetical example which is illustrative. This might not be exactly what is happening there, but this is something that could, like, this is something that would be really near to what a program manager there would do. So once a student has applied, so everything related to the student would come under a program manager, and he would work on that. Whether that student has given all forms or not. If they have not, one is how do they submit everything? Once that thing is into place, they monitor whether everything is done or not. And the student has been given admission into the process. Now this program is somewhere in Bangalore in a WeWork. So this would require people coming into Bangalore. Now, since this is a B school and money would be involved, there would be various financing options that would be required for the students. So the program manager would be required to bring in those financing options for the students. He would be required to make sure that the logistics of them coming to the place are something that are managed. You would have to ensure that the accommodation is something that is managed. You have to make sure that the curriculum is something that is managed. All the curriculum that is designed and all the professors that are flying in, the coordination that needs to be done, what needs to happen after what, all of that would come under a program management kind of a role. So this is a very operations heavy role, and this is for someone like some CAs who would want to get into operations heavy businesses. So if you want to try that, you can do this. And program management roles are something that are easier to get for CAs as compared to the early other roles, largely because I'm talking from an entry perspective, largely because the articleship experience that we have is not really favored by the startups, because it was in a structured manner and they don't have clarity on whether we'll be able to take on high pressure jobs or not, which is clearly ironic considering what we've gone through our articleship. But to ensure that you can give some kind of confidence to the startups while hiring you, is you could work on a proof of work for yourself. So what a proof of work does is, let's say you want to get into a startup like Uber. What you could do is you could go through the app, or you could think about a problem that Uber might be having. You could list down that problem. Second thing is, you could, once you've done that, you could then work on how do you solve that problem, and you would detail out all the steps that you would take. And this is something that you could show them, because this would show that you have some kind of intent and you are someone who wants to give your all in. And this could serve as a proof of work for you to enter into such kind of roles. The next kind of a role is investor relations kind of roles. Now, investor relations kind of roles here would be a bit different from the investor relation roles that you have in public listed companies, because the investor relation roles here would largely deal with venture capitals and also with all the investors in the company. So you in investor relations, you would be the sole point of contact for everything related to the financing and funding of the company. You would be the one who has to ensure, you would be the prime point of contact for ensuring that the financial audits are done, the compliance regarding to the compliances are in place, the investor requirements with regard to your monthly or quarterly reporting are taken care of. You identify the key metrics that the insurer that the investors want. You get them from the team. You identify other key metrics which you feel would be more important to show to the investors, which would generate confidence in the business. Here, you would also be required to be the sole point of contact for potential investors. You would be required to meet them. You would be required to explain the fundamentals of the business. So this kind of a role would involve elements of some elements of investment banking, some elements of analytical thinking, some elements of MIS reporting that is available as a field right now, some elements of your FP&A, and it's a combination of all of these opportunities. And traditional roles redefined, as I mentioned, is all the other opportunities that we have in the industry as of now. So it could be in financial operations, it could be compliance related opportunities, it could be planning cash flows for the operations, it could be a CFO opportunity in a startup, and so on. Now let's move on to some of the opportunities that are available to CAs in practice. So there are various opportunities that are available to CAs in practice today for helping startups, and I have just narrowed down and talked about a few of them. So the first is relation to startup registration and accelerator applications. So so here, the first thing that could be done is a traditional business registration services that CAs offer. You could offer the service of business registration, and that could be followed by a DPIIT registration services, where all the documentation regarding the DPIIT registration, all the licensing with the government department for that, all the compliance registrations and everything associated with that could be taken up by a CA. The next thing is an accelerator application or incubator application. Now, incubators or accelerators are places which are used, which are places where startups are given a community, and the founders can use the network there to grow their startup and to gain insights from everyone else in the community. And these are specific cohorts where you need to apply, you need to have applications in place, and you need to get selected to be a part of it. So the most famous incubator that is there in mind is Y Combinator. So every year there are startups who apply to Y Combinator, and they are taken into the cohort. Once they are in the Y Combinator cohort, there are various activities that take place. There are various networking opportunities within the startups, how they can help each other sustain and how they can grow the business of the startup. So for a professional CA, the opportunity here would be identifying what incubator program is the best for the startup, what kind of accelerator programs are the best for them, the creation of the applications for these incubators, what would be the things that you need to highlight for the business, because all of these things are generally outsourced by startups to professional firms, because they would they would like to stick to the core functions. So all these non-core functions can be picked by CAs, and we can increase our business, and these are good paying opportunities, especially for angel funded startups and VC funded startups. Another thing that I like to point out is I I am aware of a business which has created a platform just for scheme discovery, accelerator discovery, and discovery of benefits to startup for startups started by a CA. So their service offers companies with all the details regarding what is to be used, what kind of benefits are available to that startup, if there are specific benefits in that sector which are available. So this is something that can be taken up as an advisory service. The next thing that can be done is something like a co-founder agreement. Now, co-founder agreements are very critical for the business. Generally, co-founders are people who have known each other for a long period of time. They could be family members, they could be friends, and there are also instances where people have become co-founders by finding themselves online on incubators, but that is very rare. But what happens is for a co-founder agreement is very important, largely because there can be a possibility of a lot of disputes if the startup fails or even if it succeeds. So what happens is when money is involved and when humans are involved, there are various places where the possibilities of disputes are happens. It even happens in families, and uh, we know when there was no will in place, we saw what happened with Reliance. So co-founder is agreement is something which is very critical, and there are various nitty-gritties that are related to co-founder agreements. It could be related to where there are two different founders, while one of the founders is the one who would be responsible for the sales or bringing the business. The other co-founder would be someone who would be looking after the tech. Now there would be nitty-gritties like what kind of funding will be brought in by both of them, what kind of ESOPs would each of them have, what kind of drawouts would each of them have every month, what kind of salaries do they draw out, what would be the roles and responsibilities for them, if there are any disputes, what kind of dispute resolutions can take place. So this is a very good opportunity where a CA could also act as an arbitrator, and when the startup is getting formed, they could advise them on what all things need to be in place for for a co-founder agreement. This would be something similar to what is done in family planning, wills, and all of that. So we do have those kind of expertise, and we can build upon them for co-founder agreements. The next thing would be a process development kind of area. So process development areas, this is something that is also done within the startup by someone who's in the founder's office. But very often, even in the founder's office, the process development for all processes in the company is not done. It is generally outsourced. So by process development, I mean is development of SOPs for each and every process of the company. It could be vendor, what kind of process is to be followed for vendor onboarding, what kind of processes to be followed for employees, what kind of NDA agreements need to be in place, what kind of agreements do we need to have with other third parties, what kind of business processes need to be in place. So all in all, it would be related to creation of all these processes, and these processes would, as I mentioned earlier, have to be from an institutionalizing perspective. And this is something that is a very good area which is picking up. And this process development can also be used more from a internal audit perspective, and it can also be used for other corporates as well. The next is fundraising and financial audit services. Now, CAs with their networks and the the expertise with regard to fundraising, with the expertise with regard to financial modeling, and all of that can be combined, and we can assist or create packages for assisting in end-to-end fundraising for startups. This would include compliances with regard to foreign investors coming in. This would include opportunities related to taxation, advising on taxation, because there are a lot of differences in the taxation regarding to startups. Here, there would be services related to valuation that can be picked up. There could be services related to ESOP management. What kind of ESOPs have to be given to co-founders? What kind of equity needs to be issued to the investors? Whether preference equity needs to be issued, whether normal equity needs to be issued, what kind of structures need to be in place. So all of that can be thought of, and this is a very lucrative field wherein the fees can be charged on a percentage basis of what is being raised. The next would be strategy and management services. Now, these strategy and management services could include a plethora of services which are even done by consulting. Advisory. It should also include the advisory services that CAs are currently doing. This could also include services like a market research about the product uh, that the startup is conceptualizing upon. Then there could also be services regarding, once the product is made, services regarding testing of those products into the market, mainly from a fintech perspective. Then we could have services with regard to business planning, manpower planning, cost management, and all of the plethora of services under business advisory services that we have for CAs. And the last is the compliance and other services that we generally offer. So these are largely the opportunities that are available to CAs in practice with regard to startups. Now, I would come to this critical piece on what does one need to keep in mind while negotiating a salary in a startup. And so this I felt was very important, because of late I have seen is a lot of people get fooled and they're not very clear on what all things need to be kept in mind while negotiating the salary. And very often, while the CTC number that is shown is much higher, what they eventually get in hand is much lower. So we start with the base pay. So what one needs to keep in mind is in entry level jobs for startups, the base pay generally has a band of 8 to 15 lakhs. Like, this is just a band and it is very contextual. Now the band would also depend. There obviously are exceptions where the pay is much higher than 15 lakhs or but what this ultimately depends on is also the skill set that you bring to the table, your prior experience, what kind of funding that the startup has received, and what kind of negotiation power that you have. But generally the band is 8 to 15 lakhs, so that is something that you can keep in mind while negotiating. So if there is an offer of below 8 lakh, my advice to you would be to politely decline that offer. The next thing that we come to is variable pay. So now with regard to variable pay, is a good percentage to have in variable pay is not more than 20 to 30% of your base pay. If the variable pay is much more than that, then there is some kind of, then there might be something wrong, and you need to ask more questions related to that. Now in variable pay, what happens is, even when the 20 to 30% is promised, variable pay depends a lot on the performance of the startup and your performance. So you need to be very clear on what metrics are being used to judge your performance. You need to ask them these metrics at the time of negotiation. And you also need to ask questions like, what percentage of people have achieved those metrics in the previous year? And uh, I have seen very often that startups do offer stats on what percentage of people have received have received those kind of variable pays, because I have come across people who have had a variable pay which was around 50% of their base pay, and ultimately when the variable payout was to be made, they only received 10% of their variable pay, which is a huge difference in what what you might have in mind. So it's very important that you keep all of this in mind while negotiating. The other critical piece is ESOPs. So what is the correct amount of ESOP is something that is very subjective, and while taking ESOPs, it's a high risk, high reward thing. um, like as we discussed earlier, you could do everything that is in your hands, but ultimately it is a risky proposition when you're entering the startup, and ESOPs at the end of the day could turn out to be something that give you a zero return in case the startup fails. Now ESOPs are something that I can have a separate session altogether on, but I would just focus on few key elements for ESOPs. One thing to keep in mind for ESOPs is you need to factor in the base pay and variable pay, and you need to be very comfortable with what that pay is before coming to the ESOPs. If you are comfortable with the base pay and variable pay, then consider the ESOPs. ESOPs should not be taken as something that so for illustrative purposes, let's say you wanted a package of 10 lakh CTC, and you want something like a 7.5 lakh or 8 lakh that comes to you monthly, and if the a yearly. So if the salary package negotiated includes around only 7 lakh rupees in cash component and 3 lakh rupees in ESOPs, that is something that should not be accepted by you, and you should work towards increasing the cash component, because ESOPs are something that have to be referred to as something that is extra. Don't compromise on your base package or your base package or your CTC just because you have ESOPs. Please negotiate on that. Now, coming to ESOPs, generally what the trend is, the ESOPs have 4-year vesting schedules with a 1-year cliff. A 1-year cliff means you would not receive any ESOPs in the first year that you are in the startup. Now, once you've completed with a 4-year cliff, 4-year vesting period, once you've completed your first year, you would receive 25% of the ESOPs that were granted to you. After that, every month there is a equal vesting of ESOPs that take place. So the cliff refers to the period during which you would receive no ESOPs. So in case you were to leave the startup after 9 months, you would receive 0 ESOPs. But if you were to leave after 1 year and 15 days, you would receive the 25% of ESOPs. Now, what's very important is you read through the ESOP policy of the startup, because there could be changes that your startup has made in their ESOP policy. While looking at ESOPs, it's also very important to look at what the grant price and exercise prices are. Are they prices that are determined before the funding has taken, based on the last funding round? Would they be based on the funding that would be eventually received? All of that is very important. You also need to ask questions like, are there any buyback opportunities for ESOPs? In case you were to leave the startup after 2 years and there is no buyback opportunity, you would be stuck with those ESOPs until and unless there is an IPO, and which could be a long way in the process. Second is, you also need to look at liquidation clauses. Are there any clauses which would help you to surrender your ESOPs in case of a fundraise that, in case of further fundraises that take place? You also need to ask questions like, if you exit the startup, would your ESOPs have to be returned back to the startup, or you would be able to retain them and you are free to exercise them when you want? You are free to sell them when you want. So these questions would be very key while understanding ESOPs. Another thing that you need to keep in mind is the eventual tax impact that might come in because of ESOPs. Because these ESOPs have a multiplier effect, what could happen is, when the eventual, if you're lucky enough to be, if you place all your right bets, and if you're lucky enough to be a part of a founding team of a startup which eventually becomes a unicorn, your ESOP value would have increased exponentially, and you must have received the gain might be in crores, so the tax liability on you would be massive, around more than 40%. So there are some instances where startups also, you can negotiate and have them bear the tax impact of the ESOPs. While this is very rare, but this is something that you can consider while negotiating. The next thing that you can work on is, who will you work with? A founder's office or other roles, they might have different people looking after different things. Especially for founder's office, since there are many founders, if there are more than two founders, you need to be sure who is the founder that you're working with. Whether you'll be working with both of the founders, you'll be working with one of the founders. You also need to see that what roles and responsibilities are taken up by that founder. Are you interested in those kind of roles and responsibilities, or you want to do the roles and responsibilities that are taken up by the other founder? So you need to look at that, and you can have a talk based on this and get yourself reassigned basis this. Because if you are not happy with what work you do, you would not be able to give your best. The next thing that you can talk about is the mode of work. You can, if you're staying in faraway places, you could talk about having a hybrid model, or a few, or completely work from home, or a completely work. Or if you live nearby, you could have a completely work from office. My personal recommendation is to ensure that you go to the office on most number of days, because that is where the learning by osmosis is going to happen. And you would also pick up on a lot, since you would be working with a very small team. While working from office, you would also be able to learn a lot from your peers who are working on different things. That would give you a lot of perspective. And if you're looking for something like a entrepreneurship or a management role in big corporates, this is something that would create those soft skills that would have an exponential impact in your career way forward. You should also negotiate on the leaves that are available to you, and also on the number of days that the staff is working. The next thing is probation period. Ideally, the probation period should be between 2 to 3 months. If at all the probation period is up to 6 months, the best thing that you could do is, actually, even if it is 2 3 months, the best thing that you can do is, you can try and negotiate that the pay in the probation period matches your normal pay that is agreed. Then you also need to have a conversation with regard to the evolvement of the role. This would be very contextual. In case there was someone else in the role earlier, what kind of a role are they doing right now in the company? Is it something that you like? If you have something else in mind, you can bring it up at this point of time while negotiating, to build up that expectation. And the other benefits, the medical and everything, that is something that would be extra. But all the other things that I've mentioned are something that you need to be very much sure of, and you need to negotiate well on them. Now let's come to the exit opportunities that are available to people in startups. Now, here I am talking more from a 2 to 4 year perspective, wherein you have been in a startup from 2 to 4 years, between 2 to 4 years. So the opportunities that are available to you are immense. The best, or I think the exit route that is most preferred by people joining startups, and this is irrespective of whether they are CAs or they have done other degrees, is they explore the role of founders themselves. They once they've gained this skill set, the generalist skill set in the startup, and they've seen the journey of a 0 to 1, basis their experience, they venture out to get start their own startups with their own ideas. So if you have certain kind of ideas in your mind, maybe you could work on them in these 2 to 4 years, gain that experience, look at how the whole process evolves. Because what see, history is a very good teacher, and the 0 to 1 journey at any place teaches you a lot. So if you've learned from those mistakes, you could make sure that you do not make those mistakes again. The next thing that is available is venture capital roles. Now, venture capital roles are something that are very exciting, and they do offer very good pays to people, exceeding 40 to 50 lakh per annum, basis the kind of pedigree that you have, and this is the kind of experience that you bring in. So now venture capital roles would involve you being investment associates and you being onto some funds. So these roles would um, largely draw from your experience in startups. You would be required to evaluate new startups, whether the business is doing good, whether it is something that is investable in. So all of those opportunities from venture capital perspective open up. Another thing that is related to a venture capital role is something called as an entrepreneur in residence. This is also is similar to a founder kind of a role, but an entrepreneur in residence is someone who is an intrapreneur. So an entrepreneur is someone who starts something of his own. An entrepreneur is someone who is working within an organization. He's working on the payrolls of an organization, but who is starting a new venture within that organization and has a stake in the equity of that um, of that specific department, or this new thing that they are starting. So entrepreneurs in residence opportunities are also open up. So what happens is, generally there are entrepreneurs in residence in venture capitals, and there are also some kind of opportunities where you could be working as an EIR, and then there is a good opportunity that the venture capital wants to invest in, but they feel that that they would need to be actively involved in the business. You would be the one who would be running that business, or you could be contributing to running of that team, and you could get a share of the equity there. The other opportunity that is available is you get to top B schools of the world, because you've been a part of a 0 to 1. Because so this is also contextual. This is more from a successful startups perspective, the top B schools part. And for a successful startup, the journey would be a bit easier. Not a bit easier, actually much more easier. But even from a failed startup perspective, it gives you a good perspective to talk about, and it helps you bring a lot of diversity to the B school. So the top B school opportunity does open up for you, but for a failed startup, it might be a bit difficult for you as compared to a successful startup. So while applying to the top B school, what would also be very beneficial for you is that you have seen how the business was built. You would have connections with the suppliers, or or your customers, or you would be in constant touch with. So since you have started at the early stage of the startup before it has grown to big, you would have been in constant touch with the founders, and you have a sort of strategic mindset, and you would, there could be possibilities of you even being connected with VCs and the network that is available in the startup. So you could leverage all of that and get into top B schools, and once you are there, you could look at the exit opportunity that are available in those top B schools. And the other opportunity that is available is our opportunities in other well-funded startups who have become unicorns or soonicorns or decacorns, or or the tech behemoths of the world, which are the FANGs, your Facebook, Meta, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and all the other companies. Or you could also get into big corporate houses in their management teams or in the CEO's office. So all of these opportunities are available. Earlier, there was a question on, let's say, you are a part of a failed startup, and there are opportunities. Like after that, what kind of opportunities are available? So what happens is, generally, while layoffs take place, some of the startups do help help you secure jobs at other startups. So this is an example of one of my friends who had joined a startup which had not yet discovered its product market fix. And eventually, after 3 weeks of him being in that startup, the next Monday, the founder announced that they would be closing down the startup. So, and returning the money back to the VCs. So at that point, that startup helped them with placements. And the other thing is, once you've been in the startup ecosystem is very supportive, and that would help you to get jobs at other startups or other places. And if at all you enter as an entry level person into a startup, and if at all in the worst case scenario it fails in within 6 months, since you are at an entry level, um, the opportunity for you would be as a you could then explore the traditional roles that are being offered to CAs, and you could work something out on that front. But that is not something that is that I would want to go out for. But for something like this, where exits are required just after 6 months, what is very important is you look at the runway while deciding whether to join the startup or not, and you decide to give it a minimum of a year or two. So, right? And also, when you've been in the startup, once you've been there for 3 or 4 months, a shutdown does not happen overnight. You generally see it all. And once you are in an early stage startup, because it's very open and because you are exposed to all of the people, you start seeing the signs. So you have to be smart enough to understand those signs as well. But yes, that is not a very favorable situation. So yeah, thank you. That is it from my side. Now, just one quote to leave you all with is: work hard, irrespective of whatever you do, work hard, have fun, and make history. And now I'll open up the floor for further questions and answers.
Excellent coverage. I just check the question. So, one of the opportunities that a lot of people spoke about in startup. So, one question was that from Chennai.
Okay.
Yeah, so stating that how do you create an opportunity, as a consultant or a virtual CFO? Because there lies virtual CFO services or all these kind of opportunities are there, but how do you meet these guys, or how do you have maybe kind of a network? How do you have that?
Understood. So as a
So how to meet them on
understood. So if I've understood correctly, this is from a professional services perspective. How do you approach the startups for virtual CFO services and everything? So to answer that question, what happens is generally there are a lot of mixers of startups where you find a lot of founders going. Then there are also a lot of exhibitions that take place. And today, with LinkedIn, with Instagram, and all of these opportunities opening up, you could leverage all of these opportunities. You could have in-person meets, go to those meets, build up there. Or the second thing is you could use LinkedIn as a platform and connect with these guys. This would be, but even from my experience, what I found is uh, while I wanted to get references about the startup ecosystem, I messaged around 10 people and I got responses from around 5 6. So there are people who might respond, so that is something that you can build upon. Third thing is f- for messaging, how do you understand which startup do you message? So what you can look at is you can look at sites like Traction, or you can look at sites like Crunchbase, which have details about the funding status of startups. So you could approach seed-based startups with your services, and you could set up calls with them, explain your services, explain how you add value to them, and gain business from them.
Okay. One of the questions is from Alisha. He wants to understand what are the major compliances that our startups are applicable to a startup. Key compliances maybe. I know industry definitely.
Okay. So from the compliance perspective, I'm not aware of all the compliances per se, but I will answer this question to the best of my abilities. For a DPIIT registered startup, there are some relaxations for certain compliances. And from the major compliance related perspective, the compliances that I have come across are some compliances related to labor laws. Then we have compliances related to investor requirements. So uh, if you have foreign investors, there would be compliances related to the funding that you have received. I'm not aware of the forms that are used, but I think form CHG, and there's also, because foreign,
What you're talking about is that is a statutory requirement from
that
that is statutory requirement. Okay.
I think for
Maybe RBI must have
RBI, yeah, the forms for RBI. So I do not work with the founder who deals with the compliances, so I'm not much aware, but this is something that I'm aware of. Then there are also compliances related to your basic form 15 CACB for overseas payments, and generally those kind of compliances are there. There could be other compliances related to the DTAAs, so it would be very contextual there.
right. I mean, in addition to normal compliances that each and every state has, GST compliances, income tax compliances, maybe statutory audit compliances, the Companies Act.
Yeah.
You know, in addition to that, there are a lot of laws in India. Of course, government is trying to curb the number of laws that need to be complied with, or maybe merging other laws. But it is essential for a startup to follow all these laws. And like we saw with a major edtech startup that
Corporate
are not signing the so there should be ethics also. But just like compliance, of course, there are compliances need to be met. Also, in order Because we are not here to talk about that, but yeah, so that is also a compliance, moral compliance that you have to,
Yes.
in addition to all these statutory compliance.
Okay. And also from a professional services perspective, there are a lot of compliances with regard to investors as well. When the investors come in, they have a lot of requirements. So that is something that can be outsourced by startups, because it is very tedious to have just one person allocated to do this. But with CAs or with professional firms who could, get experience doing it for 4 or 5 startups, it can be done in a very cost effective and cost efficient manner. So that is also an opportunity that can be explored. Also, one
Correct.
thing that I couldn't mention earlier while negotiations is something related to relocation. So since the startups, the most of the startups in India are concentrated in Bangalore. It's regarded as the Silicon Valley of India.
Correct.
There could, and since we have a pan-India audience, there could be chances of people being required to relocate. So while negotiating, please also negotiate on your relocation. And startups do negotiate on relocation, and they do pay for your airfare or a certain percentage of your expenses related to relocation.
I wanted to also understand that from valuations perspective, how can a chartered accountant help to, I mean, value a startup, while maybe uh, they want to raise funds or Series A, B, C. How can a, what role can a chartered accountant play in that sense?
Okay. So coming to valuations,
The valuations I know is a very vague topic, and the
very big.
valuation that so I was speaking to one of the early startups maybe a decade ago or something. We were there. So I, as a chartered accountant, I was not understanding how can this be of this value.
Yeah.
We have been taught that a profit-making company only makes
Amazing.
valuation, very basic things, and you are literally burning money. Still, you have whatever valuation that you have. How do you have that? So, what he explained to me was that it is all on how a leader of the company envisages or has a vision and how he presents it to their investors. That is what they value rather than the actual numbers.
It's about, it all boils down to the story that the startup is building. And what happens for the startups is, for valuation, generally there are multiples that are used. Like for an e-commerce startup, the valuation is based on the GMV numbers. It's a multiple of the GMV numbers.
Right, right.
And for a SaaS startup, it could be based on their revenues. And for another startup, with for startups, so valuation could be on basis of revenue multiples for startups which are earning revenue. The key challenge lies, how do you value startups which have no revenue, which don't even have a product today? And there are startups which like that, which are getting funded. So there, the valuation typically happens basis the market size, and what is the addressable market that the startup could address, and then they work on what kind of pricing would they work on. And but those kind of valuations, as chartered accountants, we wouldn't really feel like
Yeah, I mean, of
comfortable
course, not even as a chartered accountant, even as a layman, how can, I mean, of course, there is an addressable market, these are the valuations and all that stuff. But it always, at least from me personally, it's just that I cannot fathom all these big valuations that these startups can have. Maybe they deserve it or deserve it, that's a different question. I think
and that is the reason we have seen so many slashes in valuations happening over the last year, because
Yeah. Correct.
So one thing that I'd like to bring about here is based on one of my conversations with a VC, is while building the valuations as well and while investing as well, the VCs are building it within their calculations that only 2 or 3 bets out of 10 are going to function.
Correct.
And when the bet functions, there is a 100x or 200x or 1000x potential that is happening. So they build that into their calculations.
Okay. Understood. There are more questions. We can move towards closure of the section.
Hi, Vedant. This was a very informative session. Right now, starting the explanation, giving us a brief about startups, the basic idea how the funding is done, giving us statistics so that we get interested into the topic about startups. You shared your experience with us about working in Bharat Next. So in that way, when the topic is shared by someone who comes from a background, and they share their own experiences, it becomes very easy for the listeners, for the audience to connect the topic well. So right from there to opportunities available to a chartered accountant in this profession, including live examples that you've given us to help us understand better what are the opportunities available, different roles and all. Even for someone who is into practice, how can they get into this? How can they make the best out of it? How they can approach a startup? You've given all detailed examples to us. So it was a very informative session for us. At the end, you even explained us how can we negotiate. What are the pointers for someone who's a startup, who's planning to enter into a startup to build a career. So what minute points you can keep in mind. You shared all that in detail with us. At the end, you even shared with us the exit opportunities what are available. What if the startup fails? Then what do I look ahead for my career? What are the opportunities? How can I go ahead in that? So in a way, it gave us a lot of good idea of the whole topic, the coverage wise, and in between the technical questions that have been asked by the audience out here about compliances, about how they can reach out to that, even that basis your experience, you've shared that with us. So thank you so much for the today's session.
Thank you, Trishna.
Fantastic session, Vedant. Very well articulated. Also,
Hope we can reach out to you in case we have any further questions on this.
so yeah, people, you can see the LinkedIn. You can connect with Vedant whenever
You feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and possible I'll also give out my email ID on chat. So you can also reach out to me over my email ID or through LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.